Crystal chandeliers bathed the Manhattan Gala in molten gold, concealing the city's cruelest secret. To those who watched, she appeared a masterpiece of blonde elegance and azure silk, an omega destined for a prestigious match. But hidden beneath cascading layers of velvet, fresh bruises spread across her ribs like dark violets blooming in winter snow. She wasn't waltzing for pleasure. She was waltzing for her life. One stumble meant devastation. One collapse meant being dragged back to the nightmare she called home. But the body always betrays the truth in the end. When her ribs finally shattered, the orchestra fell silent, and an alpha's iron grip rewrote her destiny forever. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and let me know which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now back to the story. The winter season of 1889 would not be remembered for New York's bitter cold, but for the scandal that tore through the elite circles like wildfire through silk curtains. The social calendar had opened with its customary parade of galas and strategic matchmaking, wealthy families positioning their daughters across the glittering ballrooms of Fifth Avenue. But tonight, at the winter ball hosted by the Vandermeer family, the atmosphere carried something far heavier than mere ambition. Belladonna Carrington stood at the ballroom's edge, her satin-gloved fingers wrapped around a fan of painted mother-of-pearl so fiercely the delicate ribs threatened to crack. The orchestra swelled through a Strauss waltz, notes cascading in jubilant waves that clashed brutally with the white-hot agony lancing through her left side. Each breath became a battle with her own skeleton. Draw air in, bear the cost. Release it slowly. Resist. Continue. Stand straighter, girl. The words slithered into her ear like ice water. Belladonna's body remained perfectly still, though something deep inside her contracted in animal fear. Anderson Carrington. Her stepfather positioned himself close enough that she could taste the brandy on his breath, could smell the sour tang of expensive cigars saturating the air between them. To New York society, he played the role of charitable guardian, the man who'd taken in his deceased business partner's daughter. To Belladonna, he was the author of every scar hidden beneath her gown. "I'm managing Anderson," she whispered, keeping her gaze locked on the crystal chandelier overhead, knowing that if she looked down, the tears burning behind her eyes would spill and destroy everything. "Manage better," Anderson breathed, his palms settling against the small of her back with practiced possession. The pressure sent fresh spikes of pain radiating through her fractured ribs. "Cyrus Jefferson is watching. You'll smile, you'll dance, and you'll secure this engagement, or I'll remind you what happens to disobedient daughters." The threat hung in the perfumed air between them, as real as the corset crushing her damaged bones, as certain as the marriage contract that would sell her to a lecherous old man to satisfy Anderson's gambling debts. Belladonna's world had narrowed to this. Survive the next waltz, survive the next hour, survive until she could escape to her locked bedroom where she could finally stop pretending the pain didn't exist. She didn't know that across the ballroom, a pair of slate-gray eyes had already marked her trembling form. She didn't know that Evander Jefferson, the ruthless alpha whose very name made grown men reconsider their choices, had noticed the way she held herself, the subtle wrongness in her posture that spoke of injuries beneath the silk. And she certainly didn't know that in less than an hour, her body would betray her completely, crumpling to the parquet floor in a pool of blue velvet and agony, and that those same gray eyes would be the first thing she saw when iron-strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The chandeliers continued their golden dance overhead. The orchestra played on, and Belladonna Carrington took one more breath, then another, dancing on the edge of a precipice she couldn't yet see. Anderson's hand fell away from Belladonna's back, leaving behind a cold absence that somehow felt worse than his touch. He stepped aside with practiced elegance as a figure materialized from the crowd, and Belladonna's stomach dropped like a stone into dark water. Cyrus Jefferson stood before her, 70 years of aristocratic decay wrapped in expensive tailoring. His jowls hung loose beneath a meticulously groomed silver beard, and his eyes, watery and pale as winter fog, dragged across her body with the subtlety of hands. When he smiled, his yellowed teeth reminded her of old ivory piano keys, stained and sharp. "Miss Carrington," he wheezed, extending a liver-spotted hand. I believe this waltz is mine. It wasn't a question. Nothing in Belladonna's life had been a question for 3 years, not since her father's funeral, not since Anderson had forged the will and taken everything that should have been hers. She placed her gloved hand in his, feeling his fingers close around hers like a trap snapping shut. "Of course, Mr. Jefferson," she managed, her voice steady despite the scream building in her throat. The orchestra swelled into a new waltz, and Cyrus pulled her onto the floor with surprising force for a man his age. His hand settled on her waist, fingers playing possessively across the small of her back, pressing exactly where the worst of the bruises bloomed beneath her corset. White light exploded behind Belladonna's eyes, but she kept her expression serene, kept the practiced smile fixed on her lips. "You look exquisite tonight," Cyrus murmured, his brandy-soaked breath washing over her face as they began to move. "That shade of blue makes your eyes luminous, like sapphires. I've always had a weakness for beautiful things." Belladonna's ribs ground against each other with each turn, each step. The pain had transcended description now, becoming something elemental, a living creature coiled around her chest and squeezing tighter with every passing second. She focused on a point beyond Cyrus's shoulder, trying to separate her consciousness from her body, trying to float somewhere above the ballroom where pain couldn't reach her. "You're quiet tonight," Cyrus observed, his fingers tightening on her waist. "I appreciate that in a woman. So many modern girls feel the need to chatter endlessly. But you understand the value of silence, don't you?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Very good." His hand drifted lower, settling just above the curve of her hip. "Your stepfather tells me you're eager to settle down, that you understand what's expected of a proper wife." The word wife landed like a physical blow. Belladonna's vision swam, dark spots dancing at the edges as her lungs struggled to expand against damaged bones and crushing fabric. She caught a glimpse of Anderson across the ballroom, standing beside a marble column with his arms crossed. He was watching her with the focused intensity of a hunter observing prey. His expression carved from stone and shadow. His nod was almost imperceptible. "Keep dancing. Keep smiling. Make him want you." "I'm sure any woman would be honored by your attention," Belladonna whispered, the platitude ashes on her tongue. "Any woman," Cyrus agreed, pulling her closer. "But I want you specifically. I've made that clear to Anderson. The contracts are nearly finalized. 2 weeks, my dear, and you'll be Mrs. Cyrus Jefferson. Doesn't that sound lovely? 2 weeks. 14 days until this man owned her legally, until she became his property in every sense that mattered. 14 days until he could do whatever he pleased behind closed doors, until the bruises Anderson left would be replaced by Cyrus's marks, until her nightmare evolved into something she couldn't even imagine. The waltz spun them past a cluster of society matrons, their fans fluttering like butterfly wings as they whispered behind gloved hands. Belladonna caught fragments of their conversation. "Poor dear, practically sold. Gambling debts, I heard. At least Jefferson has money." The room tilted. Belladonna's foot caught on the hem of her gown, and she stumbled. Cyrus jerked her upright with a grunt of annoyance, his grip on her waist vicious now, fingers digging into the exact spot where Anderson's boot had connected with her ribs 2 nights ago. Something inside her chest shifted with a sensation like ice cracking on a frozen pond. "Careful," Cyrus hissed, his genial mask slipping to reveal the cruelty beneath. "I won't have a clumsy wife. You'll learn grace, or you'll learn the consequences of disappointing me." The creature coiled around Belladonna's ribs tightened further, and suddenly she couldn't breathe at all. Her corset had become an instrument of torture, each whalebone a blade pressed against fractured bones. The chandelier overhead blurred into a shower of golden stars, and the music stretched and distorted until it sounded like screaming. "Mr. Jefferson," she gasped, "I need..." But she never finished the sentence. Her body made the decision her mind couldn't, simply refusing to continue this impossible charade. Her legs dissolved beneath her, and the ballroom spun into chaos. She heard Cyrus curse, felt his grip release as he stepped back to avoid her falling weight, more concerned with his dignity than her collapse. The parquet floor rushed up to meet her, unforgiving and inevitable, and Belladonna had just enough time to think that at least the impact would end the agony in her ribs, that unconsciousness would be a mercy. But the floor never came. Instead, there were hands. Strong hands that caught her mid-fall with a speed that seemed impossible, arms that cradled her against a chest that smelled of sandalwood and winter air, so different from Anderson's stale cigars and Cyrus's sour brandy. The pain in her ribs screamed at the contact, but somehow this hurt less than Cyrus's grip, less than Anderson's calculated cruelty. The music had stopped. The ballroom had gone silent, hundreds of eyes turning toward the spectacle of a fallen Omega and the Alpha who'd caught her. Through the haze of agony, Belladonna forced her eyes open and found herself staring up into a face carved from granite and shadows. Gray eyes met hers. Not the watery pale of Cyrus's gaze, but deep slate gray, storm cloud gray, the color of the ocean before lightning strikes. Dark hair fell across a forehead marked by a single scar, and a jaw sharp enough to cut glass was set in an expression of barely controlled fury. "I have you," the man said, and his voice cut through the shocked silence like a blade through silk, deep and commanding and absolutely certain. "You're safe now." Belladonna tried to speak, tried to explain that she wasn't safe, that she would never be safe, that Anderson was watching and there would be consequences for this disruption. But her lips wouldn't form words, and darkness crept in from the edges of her vision like ink spreading through water. The last thing she registered before consciousness fled was the way those iron-strong arms held her, firm and warm and impossibly, shockingly gentle, as though she were something precious rather than broken, something worth protecting rather than something to be used and discarded. And for the first time in 3 years, Belladonna Carrington let herself fall. Belladonna woke to softness. It was such an alien sensation that for several heartbeats she couldn't identify what she was feeling. Silk sheets, not the rough cotton of her locked bedroom. A mattress that yielded gently beneath her weight instead of the thin, unforgiving thing Anderson allowed her. Pillows that cradled her head like clouds instead of the single flat cushion she'd grown accustomed to. And no pain. That realization came slowly, filtered through the fog of whatever medication hummed through her veins. The constant, grinding agony that had lived in her ribs for days had dulled to a distant ache, manageable and strange in its absence. She could breathe, deeply, without negotiating with her own skeleton. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself in a room she'd never seen before. Morning light streamed through tall windows draped in midnight blue velvet. The walls were papered in silver damask, and a fire crackled in a marble fireplace carved with what looked like lions. Everything spoke of wealth, but not the ostentatious display Anderson favored. This was old money, quiet power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. "You're awake." Belladonna's head snapped toward the voice, and she immediately regretted the sudden movement. A man sat in a leather chair beside the bed, and recognition slammed into her like a physical force. Gray eyes, dark hair, the scar across his forehead. The Alpha who'd caught her. Where? Her voice came out as a rasp, throat dry as sand. He reached for a crystal glass on the side table, rising with fluid grace to bring it to her lips. "My estate. You've been unconscious for nearly 12 hours. His voice was different now, lacking the commanding edge it had held in the ballroom. Gentler though no less certain. "Drink." Slowly. The water was cool and perfect, and Belladonna drank greedily until he pulled the glass away. "That's enough for now. Too much too quickly will make you ill." "I need to go home," she whispered, panic beginning to claw through the medication's haze. "Anderson he'll be furious. You don't understand what he'll." "Anderson Carrington can go to hell," the Alpha said flatly, setting the glass aside. "You're not going back there. Not now. Not ever." The certainty in his voice made something crack open in Belladonna's chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. She shoved it down ruthlessly. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. "You don't know him. He's my legal guardian. He has rights. He has nothing." The Alpha's jaw tightened, fury flickering across his features before he controlled it. My name is Evander Jefferson. And after what Dr. Morrison found when he examined you, Anderson Carrington will be fortunate if I don't kill him with my bare hands. Belladonna's blood turned to ice. Examined me. What did he? A knock interrupted her, and an older man entered carrying a leather medical bag. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and the air of someone who'd seen too much suffering to be shocked by anything. Ah, Miss Carrington. I'm pleased to see you awake. He approached the bed with practiced ease, already reaching for her wrist to check her pulse. I'm Dr. Morrison. I've been attending to your injuries. My ribs, Belladonna said carefully. I fell at the ball. Your ribs are fractured in 3 places, Dr. Morrison said, his tone professional but edged with something harder. 2 of those fractures are fresh from last night. The 3rd is older, perhaps a week. Healing incorrectly. He paused, his fingers gentle as he examined the bandages wrapped around her torso. But your ribs are not what concerns me most. Belladonna's heart hammered against her breastbone. She knew what was coming. She'd hidden it for so long, layer upon layer of silk and lies, but there was no hiding when someone stripped you bare and looked. Dr. Morrison met her eyes, and his expression held a compassion that made her want to weep. I found extensive bruising in various stages of healing across your back, ribs, and upper arms. The pattern suggests repeated impacts with both fists and a blunt object, likely a cane or walking stick. There are also burn marks on your inner left forearm. Circular. Approximately the circumference of a lit cigarette. He let that settle before continuing. 7 distinct burns, Miss Carrington. Some old enough to have scarred. Some quite recent. The room swam. Belladonna tried to speak, to explain, to make excuses. Anderson was teaching her, she was clumsy, she'd been disobedient, but the words wouldn't come. 3 years of carefully constructed lies dissolved in the face of clinical observation. These are not the injuries of an accident-prone young woman, Dr. Morrison said quietly. These are the injuries of systematic abuse. I'm aware, Evander said from his position against the wall, his voice like granite. Which is why she's not leaving this estate until I've ensured her safety. You can't just keep me here, Belladonna protested weakly. Anderson will come. He'll demand. Let him come. The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Evander pushed off from the wall, moving to stand at the foot of the bed where she could see him clearly. He was dressed simply today, no formal attire, just dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Even in casual clothes, he radiated a dangerous kind of authority. Dr. Morrison, Evander said without taking his eyes off Belladonna, give her something for the pain and ensure the bandages are secure. I expect we'll have visitors soon. The doctor nodded, already preparing a draft. She needs at least 2 weeks of bed rest for the ribs to begin healing properly. No corsets, no strenuous activity, and certainly no dancing. He handed Belladonna a small glass of amber liquid. Laudanum. It will help with the pain and let you rest. She drank it because her body was a traitor that craved the absence of agony, even knowing that rest was another luxury she couldn't afford. As the medication began to work, softening the edges of consciousness, she heard raised voices from somewhere distant in the house. Anderson's voice. She would know it anywhere, that particular tone of barely contained fury wrapped in false civility. Evander heard it too. His expression went cold and predatory, all traces of gentleness evaporating. Stay here, he told her. Dr. Morrison will remain with you. Please, Belladonna whispered, catching his hand before she could stop herself. His skin was warm, calloused, real. Please don't let him take me. Something shifted in Evander's gray eyes, softening for just a moment. His fingers closed around hers, firm and reassuring. I won't. I give you my word. Then he was gone, moving through the door with purposeful strides. Dr. Morrison settled into the chair beside the bed, his presence calm and steady, but Belladonna could barely register him. All her attention focused on the voices growing louder, closer. I demand to see her immediately. You had no right to remove her from the ball, no right to bring her here. I had every right. Evander's voice cut through Anderson's bluster like a blade. She collapsed in my arms. I brought her to my personal physician for treatment. She is my ward, Jefferson. My responsibility. Whatever medical attention she required could have been provided at home. The same home where she acquired those cigarette burns. Evander's tone could have frozen fire. The same home where her ribs were fractured a week ago and left to heal incorrectly. That home, Carrington. Silence. Heavy and dangerous. I don't know what that girl told you, Anderson began. She told me nothing. My physician examined her and found evidence of extensive, prolonged abuse. Would you like to explain those injuries, or shall I have the police do the asking? You're overstepping, Jefferson. Anderson's voice had gone cold. Return my ward to me now, or I'll have my lawyers. Your ward. Evander's laugh was harsh and humorless. You'll have no such thing. Miss Carrington is no longer your concern. By what authority? By the authority of our engagement. The words hit like a thunderclap. Belladonna's eyes flew open, meeting Dr. Morrison's startled gaze. Had she heard that correctly? The laudanum was making everything hazy, but surely. Engagement. Anderson's voice climbed an octave. That's absurd. She's promised to Cyrus. She's promised to me. Evander's voice rang with absolute finality. Miss Carrington and I have been privately engaged for the past 2 months. Last night's ball was to be the official announcement, but her collapse necessitated a change in plans. Any arrangement you made with my uncle is void. She is my fiancée, Carrington. And if you attempt to come near her again, I will ensure that not only are your guardianship rights revoked, but that every detail of what you've done to her becomes public knowledge. Your reputation, your standing in society, your freedom, all of it gone. Do I make myself clear? The silence stretched so long that Belladonna wondered if Anderson had left. When he finally spoke, his voice vibrated with barely suppressed rage. This isn't over, Jefferson. Yes, Evander said quietly, dangerously. It is. Footsteps retreated. A door slammed. And then Evander was back in the doorway, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled fury, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His gray eyes found Belladonna's across the room, and something in them made her breath catch. Sleep, he told her, his voice gentling impossibly. You're safe now. I swear it. And despite every lesson Anderson had taught her about trust, despite 3 years of learning that safety was an illusion and promises were lies, Belladonna let her eyes close and believed him. The chapel was small and gray, tucked between 2 brownstones on a street that smelled of coal smoke and yesterday's rain. It was nothing like the grand cathedral wedding Belladonna had imagined as a girl, back when her father was alive and the future held something other than bruises and terror. No flower arrangements spilling from marble urns, no rows of society guests in their finest silks, no organ music swelling through vaulted ceilings. Just cold stone walls, a handful of witnesses required by law, and a minister who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Belladonna stood before the altar in a dress of midnight blue silk that Evander had commissioned in the 3 days since Anderson's expulsion from the estate. It was beautiful in an understated way, with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves that covered the yellowing bruises on her arms. No corset. Dr. Morrison had forbidden it, just soft fabric that moved with her breathing instead of restricting it. She'd never worn anything so comfortable in her life, and the absence of pain felt more surreal than the wedding itself. Evander stood beside her in a charcoal suit, his expression carved from granite as the minister droned through the ceremony. He'd been different these past 3 days. Distant. Polite. He'd ensured she had everything she needed. Food, clothing, medical care. But he hadn't touched her again since that moment when she'd caught his hand and begged him not to let Anderson take her. It was as though he'd retreated behind walls of ice, becoming the man society whispered about. The ruthless alpha. The stone heart. She told herself it didn't matter. This was a transaction, nothing more. A legal shield against Anderson's guardianship. Evander had explained it clinically. Marriage would sever Anderson's rights permanently, and as his wife, she would be under Evander's protection instead. It was practical, strategic, temporary if she wanted it to be, once Anderson could no longer reach her. Do you, Belladonna Iris Carrington, take this man? The chapel door slammed open with a crack like thunder. Belladonna flinched violently, her body remembering violence even as her mind scrambled to understand what was happening. A cluster of society matrons swept into the chapel like crows descending on carrion, their faces alight with predatory curiosity. Behind them came more. Gentlemen in top hats, young debutantes with their mothers, even a reporter she recognized from the New York Herald, his notebook already in hand. "Is it true?" one of the matrons called out, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Is this the Carrington girl? The one who collapsed at the Vandermeer ball?" Another added, fanning herself dramatically. "My dear, we simply had to see for ourselves." "Married in such haste," a gentleman murmured, loud enough to carry. "One wonders what could necessitate such urgency." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Belladonna's cheeks burned, understanding exactly what they were suggesting. That she'd trapped Evander somehow, that she was pregnant or compromised or both, that this hurried ceremony confirmed every sordid suspicion. "Perhaps the lady is already with child," someone whispered, not bothering to lower their voice. "Why else would Jefferson marry so far beneath his station? I heard she was actually engaged to Cyrus Jefferson. Imagine stealing from one's own uncle." The stepfather was furious, absolutely furious. There was quite a scene at Jefferson's estate. Their voices overlapped, a cacophony of judgment and speculation that made Belladonna want to disappear into the stone floor. She felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller, that old instinct to make herself invisible resurfacing. Anderson had taught her well. Don't draw attention. Don't cause scenes. Accept whatever they say and apologize for existing. Her hand trembled where it rested on Evander's arm, and she tried to pull away, tried to put distance between them so his reputation wouldn't be further tarnished by association with her. Evander's hand covered hers, firm, warm, anchoring her in place. Then he turned to face the intruders, and the temperature in the chapel dropped 10 degrees. "How interesting," Evander said, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade through silk. "I don't recall issuing invitations to this ceremony." The crowd fell silent. Several of the matrons had the grace to look uncomfortable, though their curiosity clearly outweighed their shame. "We meant no offense, Mr. Jefferson," one of them ventured. "We simply heard rumors and thought." "You thought you'd witness a spectacle." Evander's gray eyes swept across them with cold disdain, and Belladonna watched several people physically recoil. "You thought you'd collect gossip to spread through your drawing rooms like rats spreading plague. How disappointing that you'll have nothing salacious to report." "Now see here," the gentleman began. "No, you see here." Evander's voice didn't rise, but somehow it filled every corner of the chapel, resonating with an authority that made even the reporter lower his notebook. "Miss Carrington and I have been privately engaged for months. The formal announcement was delayed due to my business in London. Her collapse at the Vandermeer ball, caused by an underlying medical condition, simply accelerated our timeline. There is nothing scandalous about a man marrying his fiancée. But the haste, a matron tried, is a reflection of my desire to ensure my bride receives proper medical care under my name and protection rather than suffering under inadequate guardianship." His emphasis on the word inadequate made several people exchange glances. The implication was clear. Anderson's guardianship had been lacking, harmful even. "Now, unless any of you have legitimate business in this chapel, I suggest you leave before I have you forcibly removed." No one moved immediately. The reporter's pencil hovered over his notebook, clearly weighing whether the story was worth Evander Jefferson's wrath. "I should mention," Evander added conversationally, though his tone could have frozen the Hudson River, that I have an excellent memory for faces. I'll remember each of you. I'll remember your names, your families, your business interests. And I'll remember that you chose to intrude upon what should have been a private moment, spreading vicious speculation about my wife. I'm sure none of you would want me to remember such things. Not when so many of you have daughters seeking suitable matches, or sons hoping for positions in respectable firms, or husbands whose business ventures might benefit from my goodwill. The threat was elegantly phrased but absolutely clear. Cross me, and I'll destroy you. Socially, financially, completely. The chapel emptied faster than it had filled. The matrons fled in a rustle of expensive silk, the gentlemen followed with studied nonchalance, and even the reporter tucked his notebook away and hurried out, mumbling apologies. Within moments, only the required witnesses remained. Evander's lawyer and Dr. Morrison, who'd stood quietly in the corner throughout the entire confrontation. Belladonna realized she was shaking. Not from fear, or not the kind of fear she was accustomed to, but from something else. Relief, perhaps. Or disbelief that someone had defended her. Had used his power to shield her instead of to hurt her. "Shall we continue?" Evander asked the minister. His voice returning to that neutral, controlled tone. The minister, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes, nodded quickly and resumed the ceremony with considerably more speed than before. Belladonna barely heard the words. She was too focused on Evander's hand still covering hers, the warmth of his palm bleeding through her glove, the way he stood like a wall between her and the world. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The words landed like stones in still water. Final. Irrevocable. "You may kiss the bride." Evander turned to her, and for a moment, something flickered behind those gray eyes. Something almost vulnerable before the walls slammed back into place. He lifted her hand to his lips instead, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that somehow felt more intimate than if he'd claimed her mouth. "Mrs. Jefferson," he said quietly, and the name sent a shiver down her spine. The paperwork was signed quickly, witnessed and notarized, made legal and binding. Evander's lawyer collected the documents with efficient discretion, promising to file them immediately. Dr. Morrison offered warm congratulations that felt genuine despite the circumstances. And then they were leaving the gray chapel, stepping out into watery afternoon sunlight that felt surreal after the oppressive stone interior. A carriage waited at the curb, black and elegant, pulled by a matched pair of bay horses. Not Evander's usual driver, Belladonna noticed, but someone new. "We're not returning to the estate?" she asked as Evander handed her into the carriage. "No." He settled across from her, maintaining that careful distance. "We're leaving the city. I have a residence on the coast, near Newport. Private. Secure. No surprise visitors, no society matrons, no reporters. We'll remain there until you're fully healed and we've decided what comes next." What comes next? The phrase hung between them, full of unspoken questions. Belladonna wanted to ask what he meant, whether this marriage was truly temporary, whether he intended to discard her once Anderson was no longer a threat. But the words stuck in her throat, too vulnerable, too raw. The carriage lurched into motion, wheels clattering against cobblestones as they left Manhattan behind. Belladonna watched the city pass by the window, the brownstones giving way to newer construction, the streets widening, the press of humanity thinning. She was leaving behind everything she'd ever known. Anderson's house with its locked doors and hidden violence. The ballrooms where she'd learned to smile through pain. Even the slim hope that Cyrus Jefferson's money might have provided some measure of security, however poisoned. Belladonna. She turned to find Evander watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Not cold, not distant, but something more complicated. Something that made her breath catch. "I want you to understand something," he said carefully. "What happened in that chapel, those people, their judgment, their cruelty. You will never face that alone again. You will never face anything alone again. Whatever fear you carry, whatever shadows haunt you, they're ours to fight now. Together. Do you understand?" Belladonna's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe that someone could actually protect her, That safety wasn't a fantasy she'd invented to survive Anderson's worst nights. But 3 years of brutality had taught her that promises were lies and safety was temporary. "I understand," she whispered anyway, because what else could she say? Evander leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, bringing him closer without actually touching her. His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her feel exposed and seen in equal measure. "I don't think you do. Not yet." His voice dropped lower, almost gentle. "But you will. I swear on everything I am, Belladonna, you will never be afraid alone again. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I will make you believe it." The carriage rolled on, carrying them toward the coast, toward Newport, toward a future Belladonna couldn't imagine. She pressed her hand against the window glass, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her palm, and let herself consider, just for a moment, that perhaps Evander Jefferson meant every word he'd said. Behind them, New York faded into the distance, taking her nightmares with it. The Newport estate was a fortress of pale stone and endless windows, perched on cliffs that looked out over an ocean so vast it made Belladonna feel impossibly small. She'd been there for 5 days, and each morning she woke expecting to find Anderson at her door, or Cyrus, or some new monster wearing a familiar face. But there was only silence, broken by the distant crash of waves against rock and the cry of gulls wheeling through salt-heavy air. Dr. Morrison visited daily to check her ribs, pronouncing them healing well, though he maintained his prohibition against corsets and strenuous activity. Evander was polite and distant, a ghost who appeared at mealtimes and then vanished into his study to manage whatever business empires required his attention. They were married, but they lived like strangers sharing a house, orbiting each other carefully, never quite touching. Belladonna told herself this was what she wanted. Distance was safe. Distance meant no expectations, no demands, no hands that started gentle and ended brutal. But sometimes, late at night when the ocean wind howled against the windows, she remembered the warmth of Evander's voice in the chapel. "You will never be afraid alone again." And she wondered if he'd already forgotten that promise. The gardens were her refuge. Sprawling acres of late roses and winter-hardy shrubs. Stone paths that wound between hedges tall enough to create private alcoves where she could sit and breathe without feeling watched. She'd discovered a bench beneath a bare oak tree, positioned where she could see the ocean but remain hidden from the house, and she went there each afternoon when the sun was warmest. Today was no different. She settled onto the cold stone bench, pulling her wool shawl tighter against the November chill, and let her eyes drift closed. The sound of the ocean was hypnotic, endless, drowning out the voices in her head that still whispered Anderson's words, still flinched from phantom blows. "Mrs. Jefferson, how lovely to find you here." Belladonna's eyes snapped open, her body going rigid with instinctive fear. A woman stood on the path before her, dressed in a maid's uniform of gray wool and white apron, though something about her bearing suggested this was costume rather than station. She was perhaps 30, with sharp features and calculating eyes that gleamed like a fox's in twilight. "I don't believe we've met," Belladonna managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Are you part of the household staff?" In a manner of speaking. The woman's smile was all edges. "My name is Sabine Cruz. I was recently employed as a valet by your dear stepfather, Anderson Carrington. Perhaps he mentioned me." Ice flooded Belladonna's veins. Anderson, course. She should have known he wouldn't simply accept defeat, wouldn't let her escape without attempting to drag her back into his orbit. "You're trespassing. This is private property." "Oh, I'm well aware." Sabine moved closer, settling uninvited onto the bench beside Belladonna. "Your husband has quite impressive security. It took me 3 days to find a gap in the patrols. But I'm very good at finding gaps, Mrs. Jefferson. It's one of my many talents." Belladonna started to rise, intending to return to the house and summon Evander or his guards, but Sabine's hand shot out and gripped her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, not like Anderson's grips, but firm enough to convey threat. "Sit. We have business to discuss." "I have no business with you or with Anderson." Belladonna tried to pull free, but Sabine's fingers tightened incrementally. Don't you? I think you'll find our business quite pressing once you hear what I have to say. Sabine released her wrist and reached into her apron pocket, producing a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. Do you know what this is? Belladonna stared at the document, dread coiling in her stomach. No. Liar. Sabine unfolded the paper with deliberate care, revealing text written in an elegant hand. This is a birth certificate. Your birth certificate, to be precise. The original one, not the falsified version Anderson filed with the city records. She held it up so Belladonna could see the names written there. Mother, Marie Leclerc, actress of the Bowery Theatre. Father, unknown. A bastard child, Mrs. Jefferson. The spawn of sin, as they so charmingly put it in the Bible. The world tilted. Belladonna had always known her mother died giving birth to her. Had been told she was a respectable woman, a merchant's daughter who'd caught the eye of Belladonna's father at a society function. A love match tragically cut short. But an actress from the Bowery. The Bowery, where the theaters were little better than brothels, where actresses were synonymous with prostitutes. That's not possible, she whispered. My father was a respected businessman who had a taste for pretty theater girls and got one of them pregnant. Sabine's smile widened. He did the honorable thing and married her, gave her his name, tried to make her respectable. But she died before society could accept her, and your father conveniently edited the story. Told everyone his late wife was someone she wasn't. Protected his reputation and yours. Why are you telling me this? Belladonna's hands were shaking, her carefully reconstructed world fracturing along seams she hadn't known existed. Because Anderson paid very good money for this document. He's been saving it, you see, for the right moment. He thought he might need leverage if you ever tried to claim your inheritance or expose his guardianship. But now that you've married so far above your station, Sabine's gaze traveled over Belladonna with contemptuous assessment. Well, this becomes exponentially more valuable. Blackmail. The word tasted like ashes. Such an ugly term. I prefer to think of it as insurance. You see, if Evander Jefferson knew he'd married the bastard daughter of a Bowery whore, well, I imagine he'd be quite displeased. Grounds for annulment, certainly. Fraud, even. You deceived him about your lineage, Mrs. Jefferson. That's a rather serious matter in society's eyes. Belladonna's mind raced, trying to find purchase in the avalanche of information. Evander hadn't married her for love or even genuine affection. He'd married her for protection, to shield her from Anderson's guardianship. Would he care that her mother was an actress? Would it matter to a man who seemed to hold society's opinion in such contempt? But doubt crept in like poison. Men of Evander's station married for lineage, for connections, for the purity of bloodlines. She'd seen it her entire life. Even if he didn't love her, he still bore the Jefferson name, and that name carried expectations. Would he want it tainted by association with her newfound illegitimacy? What do you want? Belladonna asked, her voice hollow. $50,000. Sabine stated the sum as casually as if asking for sugar in her tea. A small fortune, to be sure, but hardly beyond your husband's means. In exchange, I'll give you this document and every copy Anderson made. You can burn them, bury them, do whatever brings you peace. Your secret remains buried with your mother. $50,000. An impossible sum. Even if Belladonna could access Evander's accounts, which she couldn't, such a withdrawal would raise questions. And paying would only prove that there was something to hide, that she was ashamed of her mother's past, that she believed Evander would reject her if he knew. Something shifted inside Belladonna. A small thing, fragile as new ice on a pond, but present nonetheless. She thought of the way Evander had caught her at the ball, gentle despite his strength. The way he'd stood between her and Anderson's fury. The way he'd silenced an entire chapel full of society's worst gossips with nothing but his voice and his conviction. He'd called her his wife. He'd promised she would never be afraid alone. No, Belladonna said. Sabine blinked, clearly surprised. I'm sorry. I said no. Belladonna stood, and this time when Sabine reached for her wrist, she jerked away hard enough to make the other woman stumble. I won't pay you. I won't lie to my husband. And I won't let you or Anderson control me anymore. You foolish little girl. Sabine's face twisted with contempt. Do you have any idea what this will do to you? To your marriage? Jefferson will cast you aside like garbage once he knows what you really are. Then let him. The words came out stronger than Belladonna expected. If he's the kind of man who would reject me because my mother was an actress, then I don't want him anyway. And if he's not, she paused, gathering courage from some deep place she hadn't known existed, then your blackmail is worthless. Sabine's expression darkened. Anderson warned me you might have developed a spine. Pity. I suppose we'll do this the hard way. She lunged forward, faster than Belladonna expected, fingers clawing for the shawl around her shoulders. Belladonna reacted on instinct, shoving back with all the force she possessed. Her ribs screamed in protest, but adrenaline drowned the pain. Sabine stumbled backward, her heel catching on the stone path, and she fell hard against the bench with a cry of outrage. You little bitch! What's happening here? Evander's voice cut through the garden like a blade. Belladonna spun to find him striding down the path, his expression thunderous, gray eyes fixed on Sabine with predatory intensity. 2 of his security guards flanked him, already moving to surround the fallen woman. This woman is trespassing, Belladonna said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite her racing heart. She claims to work for Anderson. She was attempting to blackmail me. Evander's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. He looked at Sabine with a kind of cold fury that made grown men reconsider their life choices. Blackmail. How interesting. He gestured to the guards. Secure her. Send for the police. You can't arrest me, Sabine spat, struggling against the guard's grip. I've done nothing illegal. Trespassing. Attempted extortion. Assault. Evander ticked off each crime on his fingers. I'd say that's quite enough for a start. My wife has witnesses to your attack. He glanced at Belladonna, something flickering in his eyes that might have been concern. Are you hurt? No. I'm fine. She wasn't really. Her ribs ached and her hands were shaking, and she felt like she might shatter if anyone touched her. But she was also standing, breathing, having refused to be victimized again. That had to count for something. The guards dragged Sabine away, her threats and protests fading into the distance. The birth certificate lay forgotten on the path, and Belladonna stooped to collect it, her fingers trembling as they touched the yellowed paper. What was she trying to blackmail you with? Evander asked quietly. Belladonna looked up at him, at those gray eyes that had seen her at her worst and hadn't flinched, and made a decision. This. She handed him the document. Proof that my mother was an actress. That I'm illegitimate. That my father lied about my lineage to protect his reputation. Evander took the paper, his eyes scanning the faded text. The silence stretched so long that Belladonna's fragile courage began to crumble. She'd been wrong. He did care. He would see her differently now. See her as damaged goods, as tainted. Is this what Anderson planned to use against you? Evander asked, his tone unreadable. Yes. Sabine said he'd been saving it for leverage. And she thought I would care. It wasn't a question. Evander's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. She thought I would annul our marriage over a piece of paper that proves your mother had the courage to love despite society's judgment. Belladonna stared at him. You're not angry. Angry. Evander folded the document carefully, then held it out to her. Your mother's past has nothing to do with who you are. And even if it did, I married you for you, Belladonna. Not for your lineage or your connections or whatever fiction your father invented. The woman who survived 3 years of systematic torture and still found the strength to stand up to a blackmailer. That's who you are. The rest is irrelevant. Something cracked open in Belladonna's chest, something that had been locked tight since her father's death. She took the document back with numb fingers, not quite believing what she was hearing. Evander stepped closer, his hand rising to cup her cheek with that same shocking gentleness she remembered from the night he'd caught her. "I've been playing defense," he said quietly. "Protecting you from Anderson, from society, from threats I could see coming. But this," he gestured to where Sabine had been, "this proves that defensive measures aren't enough. Anderson won't stop. He'll keep sending people, keep trying to tear you down, keep reaching for you across whatever distance I put between you." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying it's time to stop defending and start attacking." Evander's gray eyes hardened with resolve. "I'm going to destroy Anderson Carrington. Completely. Permanently. And you're going to help me do it." For the first time since her father died, Belladonna smiled, really smiled, and felt the weight of 3 years begin to lift from her shoulders. "Yes," she said. "Let's end this." The inn reeked of stale beer and desperation, a sagging structure on the wrong side of the Hudson where men came to hide from debts and wives and the law. It was the last place anyone would expect to find Evander Jefferson, and that was precisely why Anderson had chosen it for their meeting. Belladonna stood beside her husband in the filthy taproom, her hand resting on his arm, drawing strength from his solid presence. 4 days of investigation had led them here. 4 days of Evander's lawyers poring through documents, bribing clerks, tracking down witnesses who remembered her father's final days. 4 days of building a case that would destroy Anderson completely. She wore a simple traveling dress of dark green wool, her hair pinned severely back, looking nothing like the broken girl who'd collapsed at the Vandermeer ball. The bruises had faded. The ribs had healed. But more than that, something fundamental had shifted inside her. She was done being prey. Anderson sat at a corner table, a bottle of cheap whiskey at his elbow, looking smaller than she remembered. 3 weeks without access to her father's fortune had taken their toll. His suit was rumpled, his cravat stained, and the predatory confidence he'd always worn like armor had cracked to reveal the desperate man beneath. "Well," he said, his voice slurred slightly as they approached. "The happy couple. Come to gloat. We've come to offer you a choice," Evander said, his tone flat and businesslike. He pulled out a chair for Belladonna, then sat himself, placing a leather document case on the scarred table between them. "Though I suspect you'll find the options less than appealing." Anderson's eyes darted to the case, then to the door where 2 of Evander's guards stood blocking the exit. "A choice. How generous." He poured himself another drink with unsteady hands. "And what choice would that be, Jefferson? Let you steal my ward or what? Face your lawyers. I've done nothing illegal." "Haven't you?" Evander opened the case with deliberate care, removing a stack of papers. "Let's review, shall we? 3 years ago, Thomas Carrington, Belladonna's father, died suddenly of heart failure. You were his business partner and closest friend, or so you claimed. He left behind a considerable fortune and a 16-year-old daughter. All perfectly documented," Anderson said, though his eyes had gone wary. "Thomas made me Belladonna's guardian in his will. The courts approved it. They approved the will you presented to them." Evander slid the first document across the table. "This is your version, the one filed with the probate court. It names you as guardian and gives you control of the estate until Belladonna's 25th birthday or marriage, whichever comes first. Very convenient terms." Anderson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "This," Evander continued, producing a second document, "is the actual will Thomas Carrington signed 3 weeks before his death. The original, witnessed by his attorney Marcus Chan and his physician Dr. Harold Webb. Both men are prepared to testify that this is Thomas's true last testament." Belladonna leaned forward, seeing the document for the first time. Her father's familiar handwriting swam before her eyes, and her throat tightened. Evander's hand found hers beneath the table, a silent anchor. "Read it aloud," Evander told her gently. "Let him hear your father's actual wishes." Her voice shook only slightly. "I, Thomas Carrington, being of sound mind and body, Do hereby leave my entire estate to my daughter, Belladonna Iris Carrington, to be held in trust until her 21st birthday. I name Marcus Chan as executor and trustee, with instructions to provide for Belladonna's education, welfare, and happiness. Should she choose to marry before age 21, control of the estate passes to her immediately upon marriage. The silence in the taproom was absolute. Even the drunk in the corner had stopped muttering. You forged a will, Belladonna said, looking at Anderson with something close to wonder. Not because she was surprised by his capacity for evil, she knew that intimately, but because saying it aloud, having proof, made it real. Undeniable. You murdered my father's wishes, stole my inheritance, and kept me prisoner for 3 years. Prove it. Anderson's voice had gone cold, his eyes calculating despite the whiskey. That document could be a forgery itself. Who's to say Jefferson didn't manufacture it to support his claim? Marcus Chan is prepared to testify, Evander said. As is Dr. Webb. Both will swear they witnessed Thomas sign this will. Both will testify you approached them after Thomas's death, offering money to keep silent about its existence. Dr. Webb took your bribe, Belladonna added, remembering the lawyer's words. $20,000 to forget he'd ever witnessed a will. But Marcus Chen refused. He kept the original, locked in his private safe for 3 years, waiting for the day I'd be old enough to claim it. Anderson's face had gone gray. That spineless fool. I should have. Should have what? Evander's voice dropped to something dangerous. Killed him too. The words hung in the air like smoke. Anderson's eyes widened fractionally, and Belladonna saw the moment he realized his mistake, the implication in his unfinished threat. My father's heart failure, Belladonna said slowly, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. He was healthy, active, only 42 years old. But he died suddenly, conveniently, just before signing documents that would have removed you from his business. You can't prove, Anderson started. Arsenic. Evander produced another document, this one bearing an official seal. We had Thomas's body exhumed. The toxicology report came back 2 days ago. Arsenic poisoning, administered over several weeks. The kind of slow poisoning that mimics heart failure if no one's looking for it. Belladonna's breath left her in a rush. Her father. Her kind, laughing father who'd read her stories and taught her to ride and promised she'd always be safe. Murdered. Slowly poisoned by the man he'd trusted most. The police are waiting outside, Evander said. They have warrants for your arrest on charges of forgery, fraud, theft, and murder. You have 2 choices, Anderson. You can come quietly and hope for mercy from the courts. Or you can try to run, and I'll ensure you hang for what you've done. Anderson stood abruptly, the chair scraping back with a harsh sound. For a moment, Belladonna thought he might actually try to flee, might attempt to fight his way past the guards. But then he looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since they'd arrived, and whatever he saw in her face made something crumble in his expression. You were supposed to be broken, he said, almost wonderingly. I broke you. I made sure of it. You tried. Belladonna rose to face him, and she was surprised to find she wasn't afraid. Not of him, not anymore. He was just a man, pathetic and desperate and small. But I'm my father's daughter. And he taught me that survival isn't the same as surrender. The door opened, and 2 police officers entered, handcuffs gleaming in the dim light. Anderson didn't resist as they took him into custody, reading charges in flat, official voices. He went like a man in a dream, stumbling slightly as they led him toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Belladonna one final time. I hope he's worth it, he said. You're ruthless, Alpha. I hope he doesn't break you worse than I did. Then he was gone, swallowed by the gray afternoon and the waiting police wagon, and Belladonna felt something release in her chest. 3 years of fear, of pain, of carefully controlled survival, gone. Just gone. Like smoke dissipating in wind. Evander's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. Are you all right? I don't know. She turned to face him, this man who'd caught her when she fell, who'd married her to keep her safe, who'd spent 4 days hunting down justice for a father she'd thought died of natural causes. I don't know what I am. They left the inn together, stepping out into cold November air that tasted of freedom. The carriage waited at the curb, but Evander didn't move toward it immediately. Instead, he turned to her, his gray eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. I need to tell you something, he said. Before we go any further, before this becomes something neither of us planned, I need you to understand what you're choosing. Belladonna's heart hammered against her ribs. What do you mean? Anderson is gone. You're safe. The inheritance will be restored to you within the month. Every dollar he stole, plus interest. You'll be wealthy in your own right, independent, able to do whatever you wish. He paused, his jaw tightening. Including annul this marriage. The words landed like stones. Annul. We married for protection. That purpose is fulfilled. You're free now, Belladonna. Truly free. If you want to dissolve this union, rebuild your life on your own terms, I'll support that decision. I'll give you the Newport estate, set up accounts in your name, ensure you never want for anything. No strings. No obligations. She stared at him, trying to understand what he was offering and what he wasn't saying. Freedom. Independence. The chance to walk away from a marriage built on necessity rather than choice. It was everything she should want. And if I don't want to annul it? She asked quietly. Something flickered in Evander's eyes. Hope, maybe, or fear, or both. Then we'd be choosing this. Choosing each other. Not because of contracts or protection or legal necessities, but because we want to. Because somewhere between the ball and the chapel and these past few weeks, this became more than a transaction. He stepped closer, his hand rising to cup her cheek. At least, it did for me. Belladonna's breath caught. She thought of the way he'd caught her, gentle despite his strength. The way he'd defended her in the chapel, facing down society's judgment with cold disdain. The way he'd believed her about Anderson, had spent days hunting justice without asking for anything in return. The way his hands had never hurt her, never taken more than she was willing to give. I choose this, she said, and the words felt like a vow more binding than the ones they'd spoken in that gray chapel. I choose you. Not because I need protection or safety or someone to fight my battles. 'Cause I want to build something with you. Something real. Something ours. Evander's smile was slow and devastating, transforming his face from granite to something warm and achingly human. A love story forged in fire, he murmured, pulling her close. The best kind, Belladonna agreed, and when he kissed her, really kissed her, not the chaste press of lips to knuckles but a claiming that tasted of salt air and new beginnings, she kissed him back with all the strength she'd spent 3 years hiding. The carriage carried them back to Newport, back to the fortress on the cliffs, but it wasn't a fortress anymore. It was home. And Belladonna Carrington Jefferson, once a broken girl dancing with fractured ribs, once a victim who'd learned to survive by making herself small, was finally, truly free to be exactly who she chose to be. The ocean roared its approval, and the future stretched before them like an unwritten page, ready for whatever story they decided to tell. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?